Hi, my name is Claire Harrison. I'm a haematologist at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospitals in London. Today, I want to speak to you about the impact on quality of life in PV patients. Polycythemia vera was first described by Osler-Vaquez. He was a French physician, and this explains why this condition is sometimes known as Osler-Vaquez disease in the historical literature. Take a look at how he first described this disease. In this description of a 40-year-old male suffering from cyanosis, distended veins, we see some of the characteristic symptoms that patients with PV may present with. It's fascinating to see this historically presented. More than a century later, several analyses have now been done across many hundreds of patients with these conditions. And here, in this data from the group of Ruben Mesa of over 1,400 MPN patients, you can see the prevalence of classical features such as fever, weight loss, itching, night sweats, and fatigue. It's interesting to note here that patients with PV and indeed ET have a prevalence of symptomatology approaching that of patients with myelofibrosis. A deeper dive into this data shows that not only the prevalence of these symptoms is roughly equivalent across the three different disease entities, but the severity, a critically important facet, was also very similar between patients with PV and what we have always traditionally thought of as a more severe myeloproliferative neoplasm, myelofibrosis. While quality of life isn't just the sum of symptoms, it's also about our ability to live life. That includes, of course, family time, emotional enjoyment of life, but also the ability to work. And in this analysis, the so-called landmark study of 813 MPN patients, they self-reported the impact of disease upon employment. And here you can see that patients with all of these entities have a significant impact upon the ability to work for hours, patients discontinuing employment, or declaring a medical disability. And this study was the first time these facets were explored for patients with these diseases. How about patients who have what we might recognize as more advanced disease? Increasingly, we've come to recognize that patients who have hydroxyurea failure, ongoing phlebotomy, or perhaps even a palpable spleen may well have a more severe disease. And here you can see a further, more recent analysis, again from Ruben Mesa and all of his international collaborators, this time of 1,300 patients with PV. Before having JAK inhibitors, the facets of disease again shown across the bottom of the graph, but then the number of these different factors as listed on the right and the impact of progressively having these factors and severity of symptoms. When we break these individual factors down, hydroxyurea failure, ongoing phlebotomy, and palpable splenomegaly, you can see that each of these factors is associated with a higher total symptom score using the easy and simple to use MPN symptom assessment form, or MPN-10. Here, I want to share with you one of my patients who's received various treatments for his polycythemia vera. This is a man living on the damp southeast coast of the UK. He had to attend for regular phlebotomies. He switched from hydroxyurea to interferon. You can see the three graphs here representing different aspects of his blood count. After ruxolitinib therapy, which controlled his white count, his platelets, and allowed his MCV to normalize because he no longer needed venesections, he clearly said there was a marked effect on his quality of life. I feel I can start living again, enjoying my family, walking in the rain, working without taking days off for phlebotomy. This is a clear indication to me of the impact of this disease upon patients' quality of life. In summary, we've discussed that patients with PV present with a complex constellation of symptoms and that such symptoms have a major impact upon quality of life for many PV sufferers. We've also seen recent data supporting that symptoms can correlate with features of higher risk disease, for example, hydroxyurea failure. Thank you for listening to this presentation today.